Sophia Carter lived what appeared to be the perfect life. On the surface, she was the ideal wife and mother, married to Mark, a successful businessman who adored her. They had 2 children, a beautiful home in an upscale suburban neighborhood, and were respected by their friends and community. She had every material possession she could ever desire, and from the outside her life seemed to be a fairy tale. But beneath the facade of perfection, Sophia felt trapped. Something was missing, and no amount of luxury could fill the growing emptiness inside her. She had been married to Mark for over 10 years. They had met in college and fallen in love quickly. In the beginning, their relationship had been full of passion and excitement, but as the years went by, the spark between them slowly faded. Mark was a hard-working man who traveled frequently for business, and when he was home, he was often too tired to be the husband she once needed. Their relationship had turned into one of routine, and Sophia, though she never voiced it aloud, felt neglected and isolated. The monotony of daily life, the predictable dinners and evenings spent in front of the television, left her feeling suffocated. It was during a charity event one autumn evening that everything changed. Sophia was in the midst of greeting old friends when she noticed him across the room. Lucas. He stood near the refreshments table, exuding a magnetic aura of confidence and mystery. He wasn't the kind of man she would typically be drawn to. Lucas wasn't wealthy, and he certainly didn't seem to fit the mold of the polished, successful men Sophia was accustomed to. He was an artist, someone with a laid-back, carefree attitude that contrasted sharply with the corporate world that Sophia was familiar with. His deep brown eyes and charming smile made her feel something she hadn't felt in years: excitement. Week after week, she made the trek to Washington, D.C., to visit with the Carrington Chronicles and the people who wrote about her. Their conversation was light at first, harmless even. Lucas spoke of his work in art, his travels, and his love for adventure. He had an easy way about him, and before long they were laughing like old friends. The attraction was instant, and though Sophia tried to suppress it, she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. That night, as she lay in bed beside her husband, the memory of Lucas lingered in her mind, and for the first time in a long while, she felt alive again. Over the next few weeks, they saw each other in secret. At first, their meetings were innocent. They met for coffee, for lunch, or to visit art galleries. It was nothing more than an escape for Sophia. An opportunity to feel wanted, special, and appreciated again. With Mark frequently away on business, Sophia's guilt seemed manageable. She convinced herself that she was only indulging in harmless flirtation, but each encounter with Lucas stirred something deep inside her, something she had long suppressed. Their relationship soon deepened. One evening, Lucas took Sophia to an underground art show in a gritty part of town. The energy was electric, filled with artists, musicians, and creatives from all walks of life. It was chaotic, colorful, and full of raw, unfiltered emotion. Sophia was mesmerized. She felt like she was part of something vibrant and exciting, something far removed from her controlled, predictable life. Lucas introduced her to people she had never met before. People who lived on the fringes of society, without the constraints of the corporate world. It was thrilling, and for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. As the days turned into weeks, the affair intensified. Sophia's emotions became tangled between the two worlds, her stable, predictable marriage to Mark and the thrilling, dangerous allure of her secret life with Lucas. She found herself spending more time with him, hiding her phone and keeping her distance from Mark. She had learned to lie with ease, spinning stories about late meetings or visits to friends when, in reality, she was with Lucas. Her heart ached with guilt every time she returned home, but the excitement of her secret life overshadowed her remorse. Lucas, however, had his own agenda. He wasn't just a charming artist. As time went on, Sophia discovered that Lucas was involved in darker activities, dealings with the underground art world, connections to shady individuals, and ties to the criminal underworld. He wasn't the harmless, carefree man she had thought he was. At first, Sophia was hesitant. She didn't want to be a part of that world. But Lucas, ever persuasive, told her that she was already involved, whether she liked it or not. He promised her that they could live a life without limits, a life of freedom and adventure, but only if she let go of her attachments to the ordinary life she had with Mark. Sophia was torn. She loved Mark, or at least she thought she did. He was kind, hard-working, and a good father to their children, but the passion she once had for him had faded, and in its place was a deep, gnawing emptiness. Lucas made her feel wanted, valued, and desirable in a way Mark never did anymore. She began to convince herself that her affair was justified. She deserved this excitement, this passion. In the end, she believed, Lucas would be the one to save her from her dull, mundane existence. But with every step deeper into Lucas's world, the stakes grew higher. The secrecy of their meetings began to wear on Sophia. She became anxious, constantly looking over her shoulder, fearful that Mark would discover the truth. She started to distance herself from her children, too, unsure of how long she could keep up the facade of the perfect mother. But despite the growing tension, Sophia couldn't stop. She was addicted to the feeling of living a double life, to the danger and exhilaration that came with the secrecy of her affair. She was living on the edge, and for the first time in years, she felt truly alive, though she couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Sophia's world was on the brink of collapse, but in her heart she still believed that she could keep everything under control. Little did she know, the web of lies she had spun would soon entangle her in a way she never imagined. Sophia's life had become a delicate balancing act. By day, she was the devoted wife and mother, fulfilling her duties with a smile that masked the turmoil brewing inside her. By night, she was someone else entirely, someone caught up in a world of lies and deceit, driven by a desire for excitement and passion that she could no longer deny. The affair with Lucas had become more than just a fleeting escape from her dull, predictable life. It had consumed her, pulling her deeper into a dangerous web that she wasn't sure she could escape. It began with small lies. Skipping family events, feigning exhaustion, or coming up with excuses to stay late at work. Mark, ever the attentive husband, began to notice the changes in her. At first, he didn't want to believe it. He trusted Sophia completely, and the thought that she might be hiding something from him was almost unthinkable. But as the weeks passed, he couldn't ignore the growing distance between them. She seemed distracted, distant, and her once vibrant energy was now replaced by a cold indifference. Mark's suspicions began to gnaw at him, and though he didn't know the full extent of the betrayal, he knew something was wrong. Meanwhile, Sophia was slipping further into Lucas's world. What started as an affair in hidden corners of their city soon escalated. Lucas wasn't just the charming artist anymore. He had ties to people who walked on the darker side of the law. He had connections to individuals involved in illegal activities, money laundering, drugs, and other high-risk crimes. She was at the center of these activities 6-7 times a week. Sophia had been drawn into this world gradually, at first by sheer curiosity and the allure of excitement, but soon she was caught up in something far bigger than she had ever anticipated. Lucas had promised her a life of freedom, of living without the constraints of societal expectations. He'd made her feel special, needed, as if she were part of something important, something dangerous. yet thrilling. He was a master manipulator, always telling her what she wanted to hear, always convincing her that they were meant to be together and that their love could transcend anything, even the law. It was the kind of narrative that felt comforting at first, but as Sophia became more involved, the reality of the situation began to hit her. She had crossed a line, one that she couldn't easily walk back from. One evening, as Sophia and Lucas met in one of his secretive, dimly lit locations, he shared his latest plan, a heist that would change everything. Lucas had been watching Mark's business closely, and he believed there were large sums of money tied to illegal deals, hidden in plain sight within the company's finances. He needed Sophia's help to steal crucial information, documents, financial records, and other sensitive data that would expose the corruption lurking within Mark's business empire. For Lucas, this was just another step toward greater power and wealth. For Sophia, it was another dangerous temptation that she struggled to resist. Despite her growing fears, Sophia couldn't back out. She was in too deep, her emotions tangled between guilt and desire. Lucas made her believe that it was the only way forward, that she had no other choice but to help him. After all, he had shared his world with her, and he had made her feel alive in ways Mark never had. She told herself that she wasn't really hurting anyone. After all, Mark's business had always seemed shady to her, with its secretive dealings and unanswered questions. Maybe she wasn't doing anything wrong. Maybe it was just another way to take control of her life, to seize power from a system that had failed her. The night of the heist arrived, and Sophia's anxiety was at an all-time high. She had no idea what she was getting herself into. Her heart raced as she met Lucas in the parking lot of Mark's office building, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had never felt so alive, and yet so terrified. They slipped into the building under the cover of darkness, their every move calculated and precise. Sophia watched the signs, and the roof painted to protect the office from being blown away. And they lingered on the veranda. Sophia's hands shook as she assisted Lucas in accessing the office safe, her mind screaming at her to turn back, but she kept going, unable to resist the pull of the danger. They were in too deep now. As they rifled through Mark's confidential files, Sophia's mind raced. She wondered what would happen if they got caught. She thought about her children, about Mark. What would they think if they knew the truth? She tried to push these thoughts away, focusing on the task at hand. But as they were about to leave, disaster struck. The building's security system, which Lucas had underestimated, went off. The blaring alarms shattered the silence, and panic set in. Lucas cursed under his breath, and Sophia froze, paralyzed by fear. It was too late to escape unnoticed. In a mad rush, they tried to flee, but the security guards were already on their way. Sophia's heart raced as she and Lucas scrambled to find an exit, but the building's surveillance cameras had already caught their every move. They had left a trail that was too clear to erase, and now their fates were sealed. In the chaos, Lucas managed to escape, disappearing into the night, leaving Sophia behind. The image of Lucas managed to escape, disappearing into the night, leaving Sophia behind. She was caught in a whirlwind of confusion and terror, her mind racing with thoughts of what would come next. When the police arrived, Sophia was left standing in the empty hallway, heart pounding and shaking with fear. The documents they had stolen, the proof of the crimes they had uncovered, were now evidence in a case that would unravel her entire life. As she was taken into custody, the weight of her decisions crushed her. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. Sophia's secret life had come crashing down in the blink of an eye. She had believed she could juggle two worlds, her family, her children, and the dangerous affair with Lucas. But now, everything she had built was on the verge of destruction. The truth was out, and there was no escaping the consequences of her actions. The man she had loved, trusted, and betrayed had vanished, and all that was left for Sophia was the cold reality of what she had done. What she hadn't realized was that the crime was just the beginning of her nightmare. The ripple effect of her choices would shatter her world in ways she couldn't have predicted. The aftermath of the heist was a whirlwind of confusion and terror. Sophia had never imagined that her secret life could unravel so quickly. She had expected consequences, of course, but nothing like this. As the police took her into custody, her thoughts were a blur and her body trembled uncontrollably. Lucas was gone. He had disappeared into the night, leaving her to face the consequences alone. The documents they had stolen, the evidence of crimes committed, were now in the hands of the authorities. There was no denying what she had done. Sophia sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room, staring at the walls as her heart raced. The police were methodical, calm, and relentless. They knew she had been involved in the heist. They had the footage, the fingerprints, and the stolen documents to prove it. What they didn't know was the full extent of her involvement. She had hoped to keep her affair with Lucas a secret, but the evidence had already begun to tell its own story. She brought in her attorney's files, filled with everything that Lucas had said about her, and every question they asked seemed to push her closer to the edge of total collapse. She had no choice but to face the truth. Her mind raced as she thought of Mark, her children, and the life she had once known. It felt like a distant memory now, as if she had lived a lifetime ago. She had betrayed everything: her family, her husband, and her own sense of morality. The weight of her guilt pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. But as the interrogation continued, something inside her snapped. She realized that she couldn't take the fall for everything. She couldn't lose her family, not after everything she had done to hold on to them. In that moment she made a decision that would change everything. She would escape. The thought terrified her, but it also gave her a sense of clarity. The police were so focused on gathering evidence against her that they hadn't noticed the small details. The phone calls she had made to Lucas, the hidden accounts where money had been funneled to. She knew she had to act fast before they pieced everything together. The escape wasn't just about running from the law, it was about reclaiming her life. In that moment, Sophia didn't just want to escape the police. She wanted to escape the life she had built, a life that had slowly become a prison. Her heart pounded as she considered her options. The police had confiscated her phone, her personal items, but there was still a chance. She remembered a burner phone Lucas had given her months ago, one that she had hidden in the lining of her purse. It was a long shot, but it was her only hope. She would need to make contact with him, find him somehow, and disappear together. The tension in the room seemed unbearable, but Sophia kept her composure. She knew that the longer she stayed there, the more likely it was that the authorities would figure out the full scope of her involvement. She had to escape before they discovered the extent of Lucas's influence over her. As the officer stepped out of the room, Sophia saw her chance. She quickly pulled the burner phone from her bag, her hands shaking with adrenaline. The phone was old, cheap, but it still worked. With trembling fingers, she dialed the only number she had memorized, the one that would lead her to Lucas. The phone rang once, twice, and then it clicked. "Sophia?" Lucas's voice crackled through the receiver. She didn't have time for pleasantries, not now. She spoke quickly, telling him everything: the police, the evidence, the trap she had found herself in. "You have to get me out of here, Lucas. I can't stay. I'll be arrested for everything." His response was immediate. "I'm on my way. Hold tight. Just don't do anything stupid." The line went dead, but Sophia didn't care. Her heart was racing, the urgency of the situation overriding her fear. She was getting out of here, one way or another. The door to the interrogation room opened, and Sophia quickly shoved the phone back into her bag, pretending to calm herself. The officer walked in, his eyes narrowing as he sat down across from her. He asked more questions, but this time she was prepared to keep her answers vague. She had to stall, buy herself more time. Each passing second felt like an eternity. Minutes felt like hours as she waited, watching the clock tick relentlessly forward. She could hear the muffled voices of other officers outside the room, but her attention was solely on the door. Then she heard it. A faint noise that sent a chill down her spine. It was the sound of footsteps approaching. The unmistakable sound of someone making their way toward her. And then it happened. The door to the interrogation room burst open, and Lucas stood there, a gun in his hand, his eyes locked onto hers, and in that instant, Sophia knew that there was no going back. The fear in her chest twisted into something else, something colder. Without a word, he gestured for her to stand. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice low. Sophia moved quickly, her legs shaky as she stood and followed him out of the room. They moved through the hallways of the police station, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Sophia's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. How had Lucas managed to get in here? But there was no time for questions. They had to leave before anyone realized what was happening. The police station was chaotic now, a blur of activity as officers scrambled to locate the two of them. But Lucas had planned everything. He knew exactly where to go, which exit to use, and how to disappear without a trace. They reached the back door, and as they stepped into the dark alley behind the station, Sophia felt a sense of relief wash over her, but it was short-lived. She knew that escaping was only the beginning. They weren't out of danger yet. The police would be looking for them, and there was nowhere they could hide forever. Lucas pulled her into the back of an old van, its engine already running. As they sped away from the police station, the adrenaline surged through Sophia's veins, but so did the fear. She was running from everything she had ever known, and there was no telling where this escape would lead. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She had chosen a side, and there was no turning back. Felix de Grilla, the double life she had been living was over, and now she would have to live with the consequences of her choices. Sophia's heart raced as the van sped down the darkened streets, her pulse pounding in time with the thrum of the engine. She sat next to Lucas, her mind a whirl of confusion, fear, and adrenaline. The streetlights blurred past, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to mirror the fragments of her life she was leaving behind. She could hear her breath, shallow and fast, as she tried to calm herself, but the weight of the decisions she had made crashed down on her with each passing moment. She had thought running away with Lucas would give her freedom, a chance to escape the life that had suffocated her for so long. But now, as the reality of her escape set in, she realized how little control she actually had. She had become a fugitive, fleeing from the very life she had once taken for granted. Mark, her children, everything she had known now felt like a distant memory, slipping through her fingers like sand. The van took them to an abandoned house at the edge of town, an area far from prying eyes. Lucas led her inside, but as she crossed the threshold, a cold wave of unease washed over her. It wasn't home. It wasn't anything close to the life she had dreamed of when she had first fallen into his arms. The house was dark, the air thick with the smell of decay. There were no signs of warmth here, no comfort, no promises of a better future. Just shadows. For the first time, Sophia began to question her decisions. She had escaped the police, but was it worth it? She had left behind her family, her life, everything she had ever known, and for what? Lucas? A man whose charm had blinded her to the dangers lurking beneath his surface? As she sat in the dim room, the cold reality of the situation began to settle in. She wasn't free. She was trapped in a world she didn't understand, surrounded by people who didn't care about her, only what she could provide. Lucas, as always, was focused on his next move, planning for the next heist, the next big score. But Sophia no longer saw the thrill in it. She only saw the darkness. As the days passed, the house grew colder, and the silence between them grew longer. The escape that had once seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start had become a prison of its own. Then came the knock on the door. Soft at first, then louder, more insistent. Sophia froze. She knew what it meant. It was over.